afterward. Okay, so I'm gonna screen share this. Okay, bear with me. Okay, and everybody can see my screen? Okay, so we can begin. First, again, hello for those watching this recording and those here. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the policy director with Progressive Massachusetts. Delighted to have you all here with us this evening. We are going to, and thank you to the co-sponsors of this event. We have 350 Mass, Act on Mass, Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts, Progressive Mass, Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club. Oh, and I'm going to go over a little bit of what are we talking about tonight. So, as many of you first know, many of you know, Massachusetts, our state legislature passed joint rules for the first time in several sessions. It feels strange that that is a novelty and an accomplishment, but in the Massachusetts state legislature, it is. And we have new rules with some real wins around transparency in terms of the democratic process, access to information, and other things. So, and we have that because of people like you who are advocated for it. So we want to talk about a little bit about where are we in the legislative process, how did we get there, what reforms made it in when the legislature recently updated their joint rules. And just to take an additional moment there, rules sound very wonky, and that's because in many ways they are. But I always like reminding people that rules are how you structure a process. They control who has access to what information. They handle deadlines. They handle who can do what, when, where, how, and all of those basic questions about the legislature functions are determined by the rules. And so those rules can be something that decentralizes power, empowers the public, empowers rank and file legislators, or they can centralize power, disempower rank and file legislators, and disempower the public. Just as we talk about rules in terms of the economy, I think our state senator Elizabeth Warren often talks about the way that rules structure whom something serves. So we'll talk a little about that and why some of these changes matter. We'll also talk about accountability because they passed these new rules, and we want to talk about whether they're following their new rules. Rules exist to be followed. And so we'll talk a little bit about how good of a job that our legislature has been doing on that over the past month, and we'll talk also about what you can do to help with that work, about making sure that our overwhelmingly large D Democratic state legislature is also a robustly small D Democratic kind of legislature as well. And before I kind of move over to the next slide, I always like having a little bit of additional engagement at the start. So for a few like hand raise exercises with this, since we're talking about work around State House transparency today, raise your hand if you've ever emailed your state senator, your state rep about transparency and having a more transparent and democratic state house. See, that's an easy question for me to raise their hands to. Okay. How about if you've ever not just emailed, but have you called your state legislators about this? Okay. And how about beyond that, who here has met with them in person to talk about why you want them to do better and be better when it comes to kind of the democratic process of the state house? In other hands again. And one point that again I'll emphasize before handing it over, the one thing that we believe is so critical is understanding that having better process can help us get better outcomes. Because better process, if it empowers rank and file legislators and it empowers the public, gives us greater tools to make sure that our legislature is representing our interests best and can help us kind of use those different tools, and we'll talk about that to help make the change that we need to change, that we need to see changed and address the issues of inertia and over centralization in the legislature. Okay, so that's enough of me talking in the beginning. Evan, I was going to hand it over for you for the next few slides.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. Evan Mackay, Evan Theirs. I live in Cambridge, And I am really happy to be here and so thrilled with how far our movement has come on these issues. And as we think about the need to reform our state legislature, the need to make sure that the state house, the state senate are accountable, are transparent, are enacting values of good government, I want us to think back what brought us to caring about the state legislature. How did we come to believe that there were these things that rules that we needed to care a lot about, and that the concentration of power that was an obstacle to something that mattered to us? So if folks want to put into the chat, what are the substantive things that you want to see change about life in Massachusetts? What are the things that draw you to this advocacy? We're here. It's a Monday evening. What issues are making you care enough that you're like, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to be on Zoom with some other people who are caring about lots of other things here within Massachusetts. So we hear about single payer healthcare being really important, rent control, income inequality. We want to end we want to end we want criminal justice reform and ending lifetime punishment. We want better transit, climate justice, income inequality, transportation, poverty. These are the things, immigrant justice. These are the things that ground us in our movement, in addition to the substantive things about fixing and reforming our democracy, things like same-day voter registration. Anti-corruption is like a good thing on its own, and it is a mechanism of making sure that all of these things that we care about are acted upon. And so we have been part of this movement for decades, trying to bring attention to the state legislature and to substantively move forward on this concentration of power in the opaque governance that shuts out all of us everyday people, all of us as advocates who care about these good things that we want to see moving. And so we've done things like the People's House campaign. We've done things like Voters Deserve to Know, the pledge that we were bringing to legislators. And we had a lot of meetings with legislators, and they would tell us things like, oh, my district doesn't think that they should be able to see how I vote in committee. And so then we collected signatures and we brought it directly to the ballot with these non-binding ballot questions that overwhelmingly throughout the state everyday people were saying, yes, we need to have more transparency. And this was a specific determination about the rules of the legislature. We were bringing this directly to voters. We've had some people on this Zoom call who helped collect signatures for that or talked with their friends, family, and neighbors. And then just this November, all throughout the state and every single city and town within Massachusetts, voters supported question one relating to the audit. And so there is a lot of momentum related not just to good government accountability and anti-corruption and this transparency in government stuff, but there's a lot of energy and momentum around fixing the culture of the state house so that we can deliver on all of these things that we can care about. And so we have been working really hard. We have built momentum. And then in the next slide, we can see that we're getting some results. It began this year with some sort of rhetorical shifts from the speaker and the Senate president, and we were getting some promises. We're now starting to see some of the results of these promises. And I just want to reinforce that none of these changes would have happened without all of us. They could have made these changes decades ago, and in fact, they were going in the wrong direction without all of us. Things were getting worse, and so this is not something that they have wanted to do for a long time, and they just finally got around to it. We together pushed them to make these changes, and so we have shown that our movement can win on things even when the establishment is very dug in and entrenched into the status quo. We've shown that we can take them on and that we can win. And so we've won before on some of these process demands, and we are getting ready and we are building momentum to win on these substantive things that we care about that we just put in the Zoom chat. And so I am so proud to be in this movement with all of you. And I'm going to turn it on over where we're going to get to hear about where we are right now.
Okay, it's back to me, so let me put myself back on spotlight. So, for a little bit more context, for this, so at the beginning of the session, as Evan just spoke about, the beginning of the legislative session, when Speaker Ron Mariano and Senate President Karen Spilka both spoke about how they were committed to improving the legislative process, to make it more transparent, to make it more efficient, especially if you remember with the last legislative session where they ended July 31st without deals on so many bills and then had to spend additional months actually to like eventually come to agreements on things. And they looked very bad because of it, and they deserve to look very bad because of it. And then made a commitment to having a better legislative session. And then after that, after they started singing a different tune, a number of us came together to say that if they're committing to this, it should be up to us as the public to say what better process for the public looks like. Right? If they want to increase public confidence in the legislative process, legislators don't determine that, constituents determine that. So back in late January, we had 30 organizations send a joint letter to the State House endorsing a suite of reforms. As noted, that this is a line from that about how taken together they constitute necessary steps along the path towards the very legislature which the people of Massachusetts have clearly demanded. We were clear that these, like the rules itself, aren't the be all end all of everything, right? You can't solve everything just through these, but they are a meaningful step forward and that they help, they're kind of a test of activism and a foundation on which to build. This highlights the organization, so shout out to the organizations who signed on to that letter. If you're from one of them, you can clap for yourself. So we had a broad range of organizations across issues, across just multi-issue organizations, housing, climate, criminal justice, like decarceration, and so peace advocacy, kind of a wide range, all saying that the people in Massachusetts want a more inclusive legislative process. Okay. So, this again notes that the legislature took act, like both the House and the Senate did pass updates. They passed updates to their own rules. We talked about that at a previous event, so we're not going to do a deep dive on that now, but I'll include stuff in my follow-up email about this. But they passed updates to their own rules as well as to the joint rules. And just to kind of demystify some terminology, when we say joint rules, that means the rules that govern the House and the Senate when they act together. The House can control the rules of the House, the Senate can control the rules of the Senate, but if they want to control the rules of how they act together, they have to decide on that together. And then, Scotia, do you want to talk about the timeline, the where we are timeline?
Yeah, thank you. I would just add to what John was saying too, is that the reason why the joint rules are so important is that, many of you might know this, but the bulk of lawmaking work is done in joint committees. So it's
Mhm.
really those joint committees that have members of both House and Senate that do most of the work that matters to us on the bills that matter to us. So here's just a brief timeline of what happened with the rules, over the course of this session. We've held a couple of these sessions to check in after, particular updates. But I also like that this starts with on January 1st, they talk about transparency and efficiency in the session. And then we can see that it took them, 6 months to actually finalize their rules and really kind of kickstart that work of lawmaking. But here's just a couple of the points. In February, the Senate passed their own rules. So the Senate rules were finalized. They had their own, then they had their joint rules proposal. Same deal with the House later in February. Remember, it was 2 months into the session that they finally made committee assignments. We were the last state in the country to get committee assignments. Yeah, there we go, Evan in the chat. Thank you. We didn't even have our first joint committee hearing until 3 months into the session, despite the crisis that we're facing at the federal level. So January 20th is maybe another day I could have put on this timeline. And it took them their sweet time meeting in the conference committee on the rules, kind of deliberating between the two versions, between the House and Senate versions. And then, complete surprise, June 23rd, they announced, we've done it. And on June 26th, we got the finalized version of the joint rules, and it was approved by both chambers. So we're now maybe about a month into having new joint rules. We can also say that this is on a legislative side, they're having the slowest start to a legislative session in over 40 years, with only, what are we at, 11 bills passed
11 bills.
in more than 6 months. So it has been a Oh yeah, almost 7 months. So it's not just on the rules that they've been taking their sweet time.
Yeah, and I think, Scotia, I just want to underscore that point that you have that when we look at national news, things have been moving so quickly, so fast, so chaotically and harmfully on the federal level in the first 7 months of this year, and it then becomes jarring to see something as like seemingly simple as them agreeing how they can work together
Yeah.
take take so many months. And because
Yeah.
we need them to agree that they can work together, because we need them to do so many things this session to
Right.
address what's happening federally.
But it takes a long time to decide exactly how you're going to keep your constituents out of what you're doing.
Exactly. Okay, so I will kind of talk a little bit about some of what these reforms that got made were, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Scotia. And for other co-hosts of this event, if at any point you want to chime in, feel free to chime in to underscore any of these points. So, among the many things, and one that has gotten a lot of attention in recent years, is about making committee votes public, which is something that I know many people here have been advocating for a number of years now. And so now we finally have both the House and the Senate committing to making their votes public, which is like, imagine. We know that this is something that a majority of state legislatures already do, which is why it was always kind of felt like a disconnect that it was as heavy a lift in the Massachusetts legislature. And that means that you're able to see where your legislators are voting earlier in the process. And what I'd say as an advocate, if you're working on a bill, that's helpful to know who's already with you and who's not earlier in the process, right? You'll know people who are with you if they're co-sponsor bills. Some legislators never will. But having them actually have to take votes earlier in the process are good stress tests of your support level. And if something gets voted down, then they also need to own that. And you get to see how your legislators are voting. Because they should be doing that work in public in an accountable way. I often laugh at the time back in 2019 when one state legislator's excuse for not wanting committee votes to be public was, but then my constituents might call me more. Imagine, like they should be hearing from you, and this gives an opportunity for you to see, for you as a constituent to know the steps of the legislative process, for them to be meaningful, for legislators to engage with those steps as though their constituents will see them, which also helps as well. And what I noted here about, I'm clear, Scotia will talk a little bit later about what has this meant in practice so far, but it's still a win. And one thing that we wanted to emphasize, especially when talking about these wins, is that winning is good and winning is fun, and it should always inspire us to want to continue to win. And so it is important to celebrate victories when we have them. Okay. The new rules have also made it so that the joint committees will make the written testimony available to the public with appropriate redactions. We know that there can often be some sensitive information that gets set. We don't need to like that. That's totally fine. You can make some redactions, but it's useful to see the testimony that people are submitting. Out of curiosity, who here has ever sent in written testimony or gone to testify in person at a hearing? So with this, if you go and you testify in person, there's a video recording of what you said on the legislature's website. But if you send in written testimony, there that kind of the way that's typically functioned has been a black hole, right? Where you're not even sure if they're reading the testimony that you submitted, where it goes. And you also, when you can see the testimony that others submit, it also helps you understand what are the other arguments being made around a piece of legislation that you're advocating for. What are other supporters saying? And are there cases in support that you didn't even think of yet? Or are there people that you didn't even know were supporting this bill that you can then now collaborate with effectively to champion that legislation? And maybe you'll find out, okay, I didn't know those people were against this piece of legislation. They didn't care enough to show up and testify at the hearing, but they submit written testimony, and you see their arguments, and then you have the ability to craft what your responses are. In an in-person hearing, you can be limited to 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but written testimony can be much longer. It can give you the opportunity to learn, and it can give you the opportunity to hone your arguments. And it's also, as I like to say, some of the best reforms are ones that also empower rank and file legislators. So if you're a legislator who wants to get a sense of what happened at that hearing that I missed, or that's in a committee that I'm not in, who's on each side of that bill, I don't this issue looks confusing to me. Having that testimony more available is helpful. And we'll talk again a little bit later about what this has meant in practice and what it can mean in practice. The legislature also voted to make bill summaries something public, appearing with hearing notices. When looking for an image, I thought I would include this image of, I was jokingly going to call this like a young me, small redheaded child than Bill, when finding images for this. The legislative committees will now include summaries of the legislation they're about to hear. Uh, kind of in that hearing because it makes it so that they actually have to know what they're about to be listening to testimony on. They probably themselves have not read every single bill. None of their other colleagues probably have. And having well-written summaries help legislators on the committee understand what's going on. They help you as a member of the public understand what's going on, as well as other legislators. If you look at a piece of legislation itself, it can often feel like it's being written in another language entirely because of the jargon in it about the Massachusetts general laws. You could have something that says in like chapter whatever, section whatever of the Massachusetts general laws, change the to and that could have a massive implication that you don't know from that text itself. So having actual summaries, and in some of these summaries, they've also shown the history of bills, so you know what actually happened to them in past sessions, which can be useful information to inform the advocacy that you do. Okay. We've also seen them increase notice for hearings. And so one thing that I want to give a shout out to all of us, especially for organizing around this, this was a rare case of the House and Senate negotiating and having something better than either chamber had asked for originally. At the start of the session, when we were making demands of the legislature, we wanted to make sure that there were 2 weeks notice for hearings. Because 2 weeks, because so a lot of times if people need to take off from work, they need to give 2 weeks, like 2 weeks notice for vacation time. It helps people rearrange their schedules. And the fight happening was the 72 hours that was standard practice that the House was fighting for. The Senate was fighting for 5 days, which was a meaningful increase. And somehow, when they argued between 3 and 5, they got to 10, which was exciting because it actually got higher and closer to what we had asked them at the start of the session. So we like to also take some credit as our team of advocates for pushing them to do more on this front. Because if you've ever testified at the State House, you know that like you might sometimes have to scramble your schedule around entirely if you know that something's coming up in only 3 days. And then you have to make time to go either to Beacon Hill or if you're testifying remotely, you still have to scramble your schedule around some. And if you have more notice, that gives you a greater ability for whether advocates, activists, or just everyday impacted people have more time to prepare for that hearing and also to more time to make space in their schedule for it. It also helps increase the chance that legislators actually show up. Because if it's bad for us when legislators just like schedule hearings with no notice, but it's also bad for legislators on the committee who are expected to show up for something with no notice either. And so it's something that can normalize them actually doing their jobs. It also, with that, included a provision where committees would announce their slate of hearing dates at the beginning of the session after committees are constituted. Now, that can't really take full effect this session because that ship has sailed for that time of the session. But that's still an important practice, and it's also something that we had advocated for in that letter in the beginning of the session, noting that you might not know which bill goes on which date, but a committee clearly can put together a calendar of the dates that they're planning to hold hearings and general topics that, again, make it so that as members of the public, as activists, we have a better sense of the timing for when things are going to happen and how we can participate in them. Same for the legislators. If they're going to show up, that as we want them to, because we want them to hear from people, having advance notice makes that a more meaningful engagement. In the same way, The new rules also require attendance to be tracked for hearings. Although, as Scotia will talk about a bit, they're not starting this for quite a few months, but they are still promising to track attendance. And again, that normalizes the idea that legislators actually should show up to hearings. As again for raise your hand if you've ever shown up to a legislative hearing and there were like maybe only three legislators still there, which happens too often, right? You go there, you've waited 2 hours to testify, and you're testifying to two people who are still there. Things that normalize the idea that they should be there and they should be listening to the public, because if they're hearing, they should be hearing what you have to say. That is a step in the right direction. The new rules also include steps to move the reporting deadline up. So with the reporting deadline, to use some wonky rules terminology, is known as the Joint Rule 10 day. Joint Rule 10 referring to that date for when joint committees have to report out legislation. They now have a deadline for committees to report out bills by the first Wednesday in December. And that helps structure the legislative session to make the first year of the session when hearings will happen. And maybe they'll start passing bills earlier in the legislative session. Haven't done that in full yet for the legislative session to date, but it also helps normalize the idea that they should move up the timeline for when they're actually passing bills. And we can hope that this might push back against the bottleneck that happens at the end of the legislative session, where session after session, everything ends up only happening in the last few weeks, last few days, last few hours of the legislative session. And anything that can put pressure to move that earlier is better, although we still need to see the effect for us to know that it can. Also, in terms of reporting deadlines, the House adopted for itself kind of reinforced in these joint rules a set of rolling deadlines after committee hearings to say that 60 days after a hearing, they should decide what to do on a bill and that they can get 30 extra days on that. And then Scotia will talk a little bit about what that's meant in practice in a bill. But in theory, that also helps to speed up the process where they give structured time. It makes them have to actually make decisions and pushes back against the tendency to delay that dominates the legislative process. There are also reforms to how conference committees work. And for again, a little bit of vocabulary, conference committee refers to when a group of state representatives and a group of state senators negotiate a bill together. If the House and Senate pass different versions of a piece of legislation, they have to negotiate differences, and that comes from three state reps and three state senators, and it's always two Democrats on one from one chamber, two Democrats on the other, one Republican, one Republican. Out of the result of these new rules, the first conference committee meetings will be open to the public. That creates an opportunity for the media, I think especially for people to be able to know, to be able to ask them questions. I think Scotia might talk a little bit about what we've seen from those so far and about how the value of exposing more things to media scrutiny can be valuable. And that also said that at least that conference committees should give at least 24 hours between once they post that deal that they negotiate and before goes to a vote. Because in theory, we should want our legislators to be reading the things that they vote on. It shouldn't be too much to ask. And what these changes mean, as it notes, it creates a greater clarity around the status of those negotiations and more times for the legislators as well as the public to actually read what legislators are about to vote on. And I'm almost done here, so bear with me. I'm talking for a lot. One of the other things, which wasn't something that either the House or the Senate had originally championed, was the idea of having an actual hearing on the rules themselves. I think, as Evan noted earlier, many legislators have often said that the public doesn't actually care about this as an issue. But we often know that the public does care about this as an issue. And their agreeing to hold a hearing is an acknowledgement that the public does, in fact, care about this issue. And that also means that we have the ability to be watching them, and we should be watching them about how they use these rules when if they violate them, to be able to make sure that they know that we're not happy with that. So that's my kind of overview. Before I hand it over to Scotia to talk about actually happened so far. Vic, if you do you want to say a few words?
Yes. I also can't see myself if we could change the view.
Okay,
View.
let me I will take you, I'll find you and put you on
All
spot.
good. See, Travis is requesting it as well. Yeah, hey everyone. So I'm Vic Mohanka. I use he and they pronouns. I'm the chapter director of Sierra Club, Massachusetts. Um, I used to work in the legislature, so I was very, very familiar with this rule, the joint rules debate, and trying to comply with them. And I was also asked to do things like hide committee votes from our other colleagues in the legislature. As an advocacy organization, this is a huge benefit for us because we see time and time again there's a lack of transparency and accountability in the lawmaking process, which shuts us out. So basically, we don't even know where legislators stand on key issues with big campaigns that we're running, like People Over Energy Profits, Make Polluters Pay, and Indoor and Outdoor Air Quality, which are like three different bills that the climate coalitions are pushing this session. Um, yeah, the transparency changes really, really help us out. So I'm happy to answer any questions and like get much deeper into the details with folks. Um, yeah, that's all I got to say.
Thanks, Vic. We appreciate you and we appreciate all the great work that Sierra Club has done as part of this campaign. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Scotia to talk a little bit about what's actually happened so far.
Um, Thanks, John, and thank you, Vic. So as we know, the legislature has not always followed through on things that we've asked for, has not always followed through on even changes that are desperately needed. They usually follow their own rules though. So this has been a little bit strange, is that we've seen kind of this rollout of the rules in the last month. And actually, it's looked like a lot of these rules just kind of blatantly not being followed. So I cataloged a couple of these that we've talked about. So far, on public committee votes, we've had three committees have actually released their committee votes that we didn't anticipate, that we wouldn't have had before. The problem here is that the rules change specifies that they need to be posted on the website within 48 hours, which was something that we were asking for. However, it doesn't specify where on the website. And they're very sneaky about inventing new places to store information that makes it very difficult to track. So this has looked like some of the committee votes being stashed on the hearing and a second documents tab of the hearing page from April. So, this might look like we have to chase down the link to the hearing live stream that happened in April and find the secondary tab. And there's a PDF of all the committee votes. Another one of these committees has put their committee votes on the committee page itself in a documents tab, which has never existed before and doesn't exist for any other committees. So clearly, although they're making some of this information public, first of all, not everybody that has reported out bills has actually made their votes public. And the votes that we have are in various different formats that make it a little bit difficult to predict where these votes are going to be put. The second piece is public testimony. So I think I mentioned this in the chat, but the rules leave it kind of open-ended for committee chairs to decide how they're going to go about the process of making testimony public. Our ideal as transparency advocates would be to get written testimony posted on the website so that we can see all of the testimony that's been submitted. Obviously, there will be redactions for things that are personal, but this allows us, like John said, to get a sense of what other arguments are being made, how many people are testifying in favor or opposed. And there's one committee that is posting all of their written testimony public from just automatically. That's the Joint Committee on Aging and Independence. Everyone else is releasing different policies about making it available on request. And so it's probably going to take some effort on behalf of advocates to make requests across the board for these written testimonies, for these hearings, and then make them public. So obviously, there's a little bit more work to do to get to where we'd like to be on having public testimony. On bill summaries, I would recommend, for any bills that you're looking into, to go look for the bill summaries, because they're actually really helpful. It gives a history of the bill in some cases. For some of the House bills, they have the new reporting deadline reflected. For most of the committees, they have been releasing these regularly. We have noticed that it's not always before the hearing. They're supposed to be posted before the hearing. That way, both rank and file legislators and members of the public had the chance to brief themselves on these bills before the hearing happens. But one thing that I wanted to note for this one is like having watchdogs involved in this really works. And that'll be part of a pitch that I make to you in a little bit about ways that you can get involved in this work. Because just this week, there was a committee hearing that I noticed didn't have any bill summaries. And I called the committee staff. I let them know, hey, I'm looking for these bill summaries. They said, this was funny. They were like, sorry, the rules have been implemented recently. So for future hearings, you should be able to get this before the hearing. It's not exactly how rules work. Like they didn't give themselves a grace period, but okay. But yeah, by now those bill summaries have been posted. So we know that kind of checking in and following up on this stuff actually does get us the information that we want. 10 days notice, there have been hearings scheduled since these rules were voted that had only 6 or 8 days notice. One of them last week was for the public right to strike for teachers. So that was kind of a big deal bill that mobilizes a lot of people, and they had to do that with 6 days notice. So some of this is still happening. People are still scrambling, hoping that as we adjust to these rules a little bit more, some things like that might not be happening, and it's important to catch them when they do. Hearing attendance, John referenced this, but this is not in effect until October 1st, 2025. So they've given themselves a long runway to adjust to this one. And we're wondering if that means they'll try to get their hearings done before they have to track their attendance, which would be kind of a fun way to increase efficiency. But we'll be, hopefully getting hearing attendance on any of the bills after October 1st. The new reporting deadline, this has been like the most broken rule so far, is the House's 60-day deadline. Not a single committee reported on their bills within 60 days of their hearing. So everybody was taking the 30-day extension. Nobody declared that they were taking the 30-day extension. Right now, there are 15 committees that have had 90 days pass since their hearing. And of those, only 6 of the House committee 6 committees have had their House committee members report on the bills. So we have seen, a couple committees report on bills much faster than they usually do. So in some cases, this rolling deadline seems to be working as intended. But of course, you have less than half that are respecting this. And nobody really seems to be concerned about it. So we'll definitely be using this as a tool to, follow up with committee staff, follow up with members of the House to say, hey, why aren't you following your House and joint rules? But this has been kind of a bizarre one, because this was not a huge demand of advocates. They came up with this, and then they're just have not been doing it at all. And then lastly, 24 hours for conference committee reports. This was really exciting because they have a tendency to release these massive bills from conference committee with just hours of notice and then pass them. But we noticed this year that they actually didn't do it for the fiscal year 2026 budget, which is pretty much the biggest bill that they pass every year. They passed that with less than 24 hours notice. So yeah, hopefully, moving forward, some of these, they might get used to them, or, regardless, we get to use these as tools. And one point that I wanted to make too is, in a lot of cases where we're following up on these, the people that we're reaching are committee staff. So that it's not the representatives themselves that are posting, roll call votes on the website and stuff like that. And so, we know that leadership has had 7 months with these rules. They've had ample time to ensure that they have staff in place that are briefed in order to make sure that these things are being posted in the right place on the website. And it does not appear that they have, gone the extra effort to support staff in this time, to make sure that, these things are being followed up on. So like many things, this is a staffing issue, and would be aided by a little bit more decentralization of power in the House and Senate. Next. Oh, what can we do? So we've got a couple follow-ups for you based on what we've talked about. One thing that would be really helpful is you ask your own reps what their committees are doing. A couple of these rules changes are being implemented a little bit piecemeal across different committees. So it can be really helpful for us as advocates to get a sense of, what our own reps committees are, how they're operating, so that we know that, and then we can share it with each other. So here's an example. I pulled my own legislator, so my representative and senator in Cambridge, where I live. So you can go to the website, mallegislature.com, search Find My Legislator, to check on what committees your legislator serves on. So, here you can see Mike Connolly and Sal DiDomenico's committees. So here I thought of a couple of examples of things that I could ask them, and have asked them actually. What is municipality and regional government's policy on releasing written testimony? Or where's your education committee planning to post your committee votes? In many cases, like I said, legislators might not even be aware that their committee's out of line with the rules, or that they haven't been posting the committee votes in a easily accessible place. And so you can use your relationship of accountability with your legislator to ensure that we can follow through on some of these rules. So I really encourage you to check up on this, take it as an opportunity to, do some accountability with your own legislator, and use your power as a constituent to make sure that we see some follow through on these rules. A second thing that you can do is join our rules compliance team. So we're we're putting together a team of volunteers to follow up on some of these rules changes. Obviously, we're seeing, like 8 to 10 new changes implemented. So across the board, we really need some hands on deck to make sure that we're following through on these. And, from my own experience, I've seen that watchdog activities really work on making sure that we get follow through on these transparency changes. So I'm going to drop in the chat. I have made a Google form to an interest form for our rules compliance team. This is kind of being put together by a couple of the allies on the call, Progressive Mass, 350, pooling volunteers together to follow up on some of these rules changes. So if you're interested in that, I've dropped the link in the chat for the interest form. And last but not least, we know that this is just a start to really getting the transparent, accountable, and democratic legislature that we want. In Act en Masse, we talk often about the lack of transparency and also the concentration of power and leadership. So we know that another huge block to progress in the building is the way that legislative leaders maintain control over their membership. They have this, enormous system of legislative stipends by which they ensure that representatives are dependent on them for their livelihoods, which can be taken away if they're voting against the speaker. During the last session, we saw that in the House, only 20 Democratic representatives out of 132 ever voted differently from Speaker Mariano. So we also have an issue of really moving in lockstep with leadership. So there are a couple of members of the transparency movement, including Act en Masse, including the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, that are considering taking some certain reforms to the ballot. And so there will be opportunities for signature collection potentially in the fall. So keep an eye out. There will be further actions in order to challenge the concentration of power and leadership, not just at the ballot, but that'll be another next step for our advocacy work, using some of these tools to ensure that our rank and file members are empowered to act on our behalf, and that leadership doesn't get to call the shots. So just keep an eye out for that. There will be future actions coming up. And thank you all for coming. I think it would be a good time to have some questions, John. I don't know. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think questions make sense. We're just stopping the screen share. Happy to field any questions that folks have. And if any of our co-hosts want to join on Spotlight, I'll add you on Spotlight as well for answering questions. I see from Peggy, yes, we'll mail the slides as well as a video recording to everybody on this, as well as that sign up form for those who want to get more involved with our kind of accountability team. But happy to entertain any questions that folks have. You can use the hand raise function, or you can drop your questions in the chat. If nobody has any questions, we don't need to make you ask them. Maria, that's a great question. So just so Maria, I see a question from Maria and same from Huan about what is the impact that these rules have on future sessions. So what the answer is that is that they will carry over by default unless they change them, right? So that means at the beginning of the legislative session, the House and the Senate need to pass their rules for that session and need to pass joint rules. But the way that they operate is that their baseline for the next session is always the set of rules from the last session. And it's also, as we noted before, when they allegedly will have a hearing about those rules, can be at the end of the session, can be an opportunity to make sure that those changes stay in rather than leave. Um, Scotia, Evan, anything you want to chime in on that
Yeah.
tonight?
To this question about like the continuation of rules, so now these things get baked in sort of as like a
Hmm.
status quo, and then things will move, but they can get worse.
Hmm.
So we know that in February of this year, in the House rules, they moved backwards on one of the protections from harassment within Beacon Hill, and so we have to be really attentive to moving forwards on the things that we care about, and then also defending things and trying to make sure that we're not continuing to go in the wrong direction. I
Hmm.
just put a link in the chat.
Awesome. And I see a comment in the chat. I see Barbara's comment about owning kind of compliance of this. Join our accountability working group because that's what we want to talk about how to make sure that we hold people to these. Um, See a question in the chat about for submitting written testimony, is it better to use snail or email? Typically, email is what committees request, and that's typically on the page for the hearing itself, where they say what email address should be sent to, whether it's a committee email address, whether it's the chairs, or whether it's committee staff. I see who in committees is responsible for the actual posting of information. Scotia, because you've been calling them. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so it's really committee staff that's often responsible for, posting things on the website. Also, I believe that they finalized the rule that the bill summaries are actually also written by committee staff. So, when those aren't being posted, often that's, another thing on the plate of the committee staff. And that's
Mhm.
another reason why, it was really this responsibility of leadership to ensure that they had people in place to make sure that these are being implemented, and that folks are, well compensated for the work that they do. Also, we know that legislative staff, despite forming the backbone of a lot of what we see coming out of the legislature, are some of the most underpaid people in the building
Mhm.
often, and very overworked as well. So yeah, it is often committee staff that are responsible for making these changes. And when you call the committee, because each committee has a phone number. When you call, it's not the legislators that answer the phone; it's the staff. So they often have more updated information than the legislators themselves about, specifics of where on the website things are located. And I do recommend, really contacting the committees and contacting the legislators yourself, to follow up on questions like that. Like, I know that this is supposed to be posted. Can you direct me to it? Can you help me find it? Yeah.
The
Awesome.
next question has to
Go
do
ahead.
with, yeah, I work during the day. What can I do to have stronger advocacy work And one of the ways to think about this question is like communicating and speaking with your legislator in a way that they're more likely to hear you. And one of the ways to do that is to communicate first with your friends, your family, your neighbors, other people who live within the district. Everybody on this call can try and set a challenge for yourself. Maybe this summer that you're able to go to a block party and you're able to meet a neighbor. You're able to meet somebody else within your own building who also cares about immigration justice, who also cares about healthcare. Because a lot of folks are not paying as deep attention to state politics in the way that we are on a Zoom call on a Monday night. And so not only are you doing the work of communicating with your friends, family, and neighbors about the importance of state politics, but there are so many people who are having to work two, three, four jobs just to try and make ends meet with how expensive things like housing are right now. And so before you have that meeting, let's say with a legislator, talk with your friends, family, and neighbors and hear what would they want to hear if they weren't busy at the same time with childcare or elder care or something else that's pulling them away. And then I also recommend that as you're emailing your legislator, if you're like emailing them with a question or you're emailing them to say like, I really care about this thing. Why haven't you co-sponsored this yet? That you can CC other people, especially constituents. You can say, we all live on this street. We're neighbors. We live in the same building. I'm CCing my housemates, and they also care about stopping the construction of a new women's prison. And that is a mechanism of amplifying the strength of your voice.
I think that's such a critical point because it emphasizes what, like, that often elected officials can believe that people aren't paying attention to what they're doing, and it's our role as activists to make sure that they know that we are. It's so critical. I saw a question from Reggie about if you work during the day, how can you help with kind of in this stuff? I will say for our transparent, like if you want to be a part of our accountability working group, we'll probably end up meeting in on an evening is my go-to guess with that. And in terms of even advocating with your legislator should be like they work for you. Sometimes that they'll have town halls or events in the district on weekends or in evenings, and you should still call and email whenever you're able to with the expectation that they, as your elected officials, should respond. So that you do that, and that you should, it doesn't mean you have to go into the state house in the middle of the day. If you can, that's amazing. But you should still call them, you should still email them, and you should still approach that with the expectation that they should be responding to those emails. I see a question about what's the enforcement mechanism present in the joint rules. Um, that's largely it's they create their own rules. There's no like uh there's no, let's say, person who's like an ombudsman, I guess, who comes in and like comes down and like reports to them that they've broken a rules X, Y, and Z, which basically puts that role on the public and on the media because it doesn't exist. That like the rules exist and they are expected to be followed by the legislature, but nothing happens by as direct result of them not, unless the public and the media make something happen as a result of them not. Anything else on that point, Scotia or Evan, that you would want to tag in?
Yeah, we are the accountability mechanism. When they vote to suspend the rules such that they can skirt their way around some of this, so often they don't hear from people who are frustrated by that. And so it's up to us to communicate that and then also to talk with our friends, our family, and our neighbors about the importance of this and using some of the information that you've learned today as sort of an entry point in that conversation.
Awesome. And then I see some support for the State House Staff Union, which I think is an important thing because Scotia noted many of these staffers in Beacon Hill are underpaid for the work that they do, and that they have been fighting for a union that has not yet been recognized, and that is important legislation and an important campaign to support the Massachusetts State House Employees Union. I see a question about ballot questions. I would just refer for like on this issue itself, that I would say me, I'm not part of personally not in like the inner circle decision making about the stipend reform ballot question, but the bill I've like Progressive Mass has been supportive of. I know Scotia, I think you're more plugged into the ballot discussions themselves. which I know that is being actively considered as a ballot question.
And on that question, I'm not like staff or anything for these, but all of these are democratic decisions. So there was a question that specifically asked about, is Progressive Mass going to support this? Well, how does Progressive Mass
Yeah.
support things? It's folks are members, and then folks
Hmm.
communicate that as members they want to do something, and then they take a vote in a similar way. 350 is looking to what members want to do. Sierra Club is
Hmm.
listening. What do our members want to do? And so being a membership, talking with other people who share some of the
Hmm.
values, issues that you care about, and then making sure that some of this anti-corruption, this good government is part of the conversation within your union, within
Hmm.
your organization of faith, within your neighborhood group, and that folks are learning about these process obstacles to getting the substance that we want to have.
Hmm. Scotia, anything else you want to chime in about the ballot question itself, or like the possibility of a ballot question?
Yeah, so it's based off, like John mentioned, it's based off of a bill that's been promoted by the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, that would dramatically reduce the number of stipends that are controlled by leadership, in hopes of really empowering rank and file members, ensuring that they can act as independent lawmakers and represent their constituents without risking their jobs, or their livelihood. The specific language of the bill of a potential ballot question is still kind of being hammered out in conversations with the attorney general, and kind of figuring out what really works best when talking to the public about it. But we're expect the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature is hoping to take kind of concrete steps in the next month to formally bring that to the ballot in 2026. So updates on that will be coming in the next month. And
Awesome. And I saw a question in the chat for Vic, and Vic, if you're still here, was as a former staffer, were there any reforms you saw that were easily implementable?
Yeah, so some of these, one second. Sorry, I had a tech issue. Some of these are actually will take a lot of effort. So bill summaries, which we prepared as committee staff, that takes forever, because I used to work in the energy committee and we had to go through some bills that were dozens of pages long and super complicated. There's also a lot of committees where they're just confusing. So that one I feel like is I'll be interested to see how they make that available. I think the better place to go for that information is the advocates and the bill sponsors than the committees. The notice stuff, honestly, it's just bad planning. They like when I was working for a committee, which was 10 years ago, so it wasn't recent. Um, they would plan all this stuff last second. So it wasn't even that they were hiding it from the public. They just didn't do the work until the last minute. So it really it's just as simple as that, like making them plan ahead a little, making them do some of that work. I think it's just going to be better for them if they adopted these as norms, which I'm not sure if we'll see. And the other thing about the committees, I think I saw there's 33 joint committees, and then there's 11 in the House and 11 in the Senate, standing committees. Um, I think each one is run differently. So that's part of the issue here is that a lot of the discretion is up to the chair. So as advocates, we really have to create a slightly different strategy for each committee.
Mhm. Vic, I liked your point about how you never need to assume malice when sometimes it's just incompetence.
Honestly, there wasn't a ton of malice out there. It was yeah, just like terrible coordinate. Well, there's a lot of like there's a huge conflict between the House and the Senate
Mhm.
and which one is more powerful. And that is something we've seen, especially in the climate movement, trying to play them against each other. So I do not endorse a strategy of playing the sides against each other on enforcing these rules.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think that might not be productive for us. If we do that, we have to really think through how we play that and the two
Mhm.
different sides. but we should treat them as separate. And also, there's, at least for the climate issues, there's like a base assumption that they disagree, they want to have a conflict.
Mhm.
So the rules are one of the venues that they fight.
Just wanted to in the chat, kind of John Heck noting about how the stipend reform ballot question would also condition stipends for leadership and leadership appointed chairs on transparency and accountability. Greater enforcement. Shout out Rachel Polliner noting that like the ballot questions being considered around open records and improving the state public records law, which hasn't been updated and now in about a decade. That may go through any other things in the chat that we've missed. Could you answer this in chat? Scotia, do you want to respond to the question from Heather about how does each legislator have a staffer or are staffers assigned to only committees or both?
Sure. Yeah, so every legislator has at least one staff. Many House members actually make do with just one staffer. And Senate members tend to have a few staff. And then members of leadership on either side will have a few staff. And then there's also committee staff that technically serve the committee, but tend to report to the House chair to make things easier. And so control over staffing is also another huge way that leadership maintains control over the membership. If you are out of favor with leadership, you will never get approved in order to hire another staffer. So folks that make do with one staffer, that is the person that has to do research on bills, answer the phone in the office, any constituent services. They have to handle everything in the office of that House member. And so it means that they're off the House rank and file members, don't really have the resources to be super informed about the bills that they're voting on and also deliver on the needs of their constituents. And that is absolutely something. Control over staffing and the number of staff is something that leadership uses in order to make sure that people stay in line, which is not great for staff either.
Mm-hmm. Any other final questions? We can definitely send out, I see from Miriam's question, can send out kind of a list of what some of the new rules are to be able to check against this. And I can send out, I've seen questions in chat about sending out the chat. Happy to send out the chat, which does automatically save for me after the meeting because there has been a lot of good discussion there so far. And if there are no final questions, I'm happy to offer to anybody on Spotlight if you want any final comments as we wrap up and thank everybody for their evening. Scotia, Evan, Vic, any final comments any of you want to make?
Thanks for coming, guys. I mean, this is like the first step to accountability is taking a Monday night to learn about what's going on. And I hope that some of those next steps that we mentioned, you guys will be doing in step with us.
Yeah, thank you for joining and try and think about who else you can bring into this movement and try and think about where does your power reside? Are you a member of a labor union? Are you part of an advocacy organization? How are you going to bring other people into this struggle together? Because the stakes are incredibly high. When we think about all of the awful things that the Trump
Mhm.
administration is doing, and that not only could Massachusetts be doing good thing after good thing to
Mhm.
protect as many communities as possible, we could also be setting the positive example of what is possible when we have good government, when we have accountability, when we
Mhm.
have everyday people engaged as part of the process. And so, like, it is for the good of Massachusetts, but it is also for the good of the country that we are engaging with Beacon Hill right now.
Mhm. No, I think it's good. I always like to say like it's the importance of passing good policy because it can spread outward and upward. And so it's good to have like good democratic process that can produce good policy that can be contagious elsewhere. And given everything happening at national level, we really do need good policy to be happening on some level. And the state level is a place where we can have that impact. It's closer to us. Uh, we in theory have numbers to make change, and we need to make sure that they know that we not only want them to, but are demanding that they do. Like, Vic, do you want to say any final words?
Just you all probably heard about this because you're with an organization like ours. But follow us, pay attention to the local elections.
Hmm.
Everything that happens is a political signal. And the people in office are like the biggest political junkies. There's a
Yeah.
new poll that comes out, a new survey. I'm sure they're all going to be looking at that like Michelle Wu survey or poll that just came out, and think about how the messaging and how everyone in Massachusetts reacts to that. So all these little things, they seem a little insignificant, but the people we're talking about are the people who are paying the most attention to that.
Yeah, I remember hearing like before about how many legislators spend so much time looking at their mentions on different platforms, which is something to know that they are looking at that. Because even though we know that social media isn't real life, if you're a legislator, it becomes very quickly can be viewed as such by you. So know that you have the ability to shape perception, and that is a critical thing, important to do to both build up support, but also help change the perception of what's on the ground.
And something you could do, this is a rare opportunity for progressives, but thank them for voting for these rules,
Hmm.
even if they didn't, because then it'll train them a little bit to be like, oh wait, these rules, people liked it. I got good feedback from doing this thing.
Hmm. No, I think that's a great point that like even though like a lot of us I feel like oppositional by default, if people do good things, give them credit so that they want the continued positive reinforcement.
And to let them know that you paid attention to the rules change and will notice if they don't do it.
Hmm. Awesome. With that as a great final note of accountability, I want to say thank you to everybody again for joining us. You will get this recording afterwards, and we look forward to seeing you again and participating in continued advocacy with all of you.
Solidarity forever. Good night, everybody.
Thank you guys.